Good evening. Tonight is Saturday, August the 22nd. It's about 5 minutes past 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I haven't checked in here in quite a while, so I'm going to do this tonight. Our tonight's topic is Völkisch National. That is the German word or nouns for this. And I'm going to get to this in a second. I just want to say a couple things about Iran. And I haven't made any videos about Iran because the information we're getting from Iran is so unreliable that it is better not to say anything about it until we get clear and concise information from Iran of what actually is going on there, what is transpiring, and so far and so on. The propaganda on all sides is just too far out to say anything. Now, to our topic tonight is we still have the ongoing war between the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, where there is more thing on the horizon. And one of the things which is probably going to come in the Russian Federation in the fall is another draft, a large-sized draft. And as a result of the original draft they had, is that they kind of closed down the borders because they issued new draft ID cards in the Russian Federation, all that stuff. So this time it will be a lot more difficult for young Russian men to leave Russia to actually, evade a draft and wind up in that war with the Ukraine. That is the thing. But the reason why I choose or have chosen Völkisch National as a topic tonight is because, for one, there's not much talk about it, and yet we are at the crossroads with many things in our world today where this plays a vital role between capitalism, which we're going to look at later on. But the first thing I wanted to take a look at is what actually does it mean, Völkisch National. National is pretty easy. It's national, nationalism, patriotism, that sort of thing. Völkisch means it is a group of people. It could be an ethnic group, it could be a race, it could be people of a particular region with different ethnic backgrounds. That is all inclusive in there. So Völkisch does not necessarily mean it is only race-based or ethnicity-based. If you're thinking in terms of Third Reich and National Socialism and that sort of stuff, you're correct, because the Nazis used this terminology without further explaining it, and they used it for their purpose, which kind of fits, but it is by far broader than this, and it is by far more of an issue today than it was back in the 1930s. You will see this in a minute. Now let me explain Völkisch a little bit. If you remember this, if you have watched my videos, then you know that I've lived in Oahu, or on Oahu, for about 10 years. And I was very blessed and fortunate that I was able to live with Hawaiian people, with native Hawaiians, and I got to know their, culture very well, more so than most people, actually. And I consider myself very fortunate with this, because that is an opportunity which came up, which doesn't come easily like this. So anyway, to explain Völkisch, to give you an idea, there was a young man on the Big Island, and we're writing the year 1779, and James Cook came back to the Hawaiian Islands after his first trip, and they had another kind of a King Nuinu down there, and that was before Kamehameha actually became the king of the Big Island, and he met with James Cook, and he learned quite a bit about the United Kingdom, a unified country between Scotland, the Welsh, and other areas, and the English and that sort of stuff on how the English king had unified the United Kingdom or the islands basically, and that kind of left a mark or impressed Kamehameha the first, who then became in 1882 or 1881, just a couple of years after the visit with James Cook. At that point, he became the king of the Big Island. The Hawaiian people, the native Hawaiians on Oahu, had a different ruler. I forgot his name at the time. And what Kamehameha decided was that he would invade and conquer Oahu as the biggest island with the biggest amount of native people. Now you have to remember this. This is Hawaiian people against Hawaiian people, one race. There's no outside interaction in this, no other people. Kamehameha had gotten some rifles from the British, but that was about it. The final battle, so he took his Kanakas, what we call them. These are the able-bodied male adults, probably from age 16, 15, 16 on. They were their soldiers, the older ones were left there, so the young folks basically in their late teens and 20s. They went with Kamehameha to Oahu, and they used their outriggers to get there. And they confronted, or they started fighting with the Oahu tribe. And that transpired at the Nuuanu Valley. That is the valley right behind the airport today. And it goes up the mountain. And if you go up the Nuuanu Valley, you're going to come on top there, what is the Pali and the Pali Lookout today on Pali Highway. And they went over the top, and they winded up, Kamehameha's people winded up throwing all the male soldiers, the Kanakas from Oahu, down that cliff that's about 100, 200 meter, I think so. Could be 300 meter deep, straight fall down. And of course, they all perished. If that would happen today, they would take Kamehameha I and would drag him in front of the War Crimes Tribunal in Den Haag, for this. But this is how Hawaii became a unified kingdom. And later on, we had in Europe the unification wars with Prussia, where they tried to unify Germany, which then came about in 1870-71 with the Prusso-Franco War, which Prussia won, and they proclaimed the German Empire at the Versailles Palace, which I think was one of the most insane and stupidest things they could have done. But that's what they did. I would have not done anything like this, but this is what they did. So this is how we became Völkisch. This is the Völkische idea. And in this, we have what we call Volkswirtschaft. This is the national economy. That means you have a self-contained, self-sustained economical model where this country produces everything it needs and has very little imports and a certain amount of exports. That was always there, but it is basically small. So what you do is, say, like the French have champagne. So what did the Germans do is they imported champagne from France because the French champagne was better. And the same with oysters. And it is usually the delicatesse stuff, the food items, and then what came at early 1810, 1820 was the steam engines. And the first steam engines, of course, were built in England. So they were imported into Germany, into France, into Italy, all of those countries, and the shipbuilders imported this. So there was some import and export there. And then, of course, the French started building their own steam engines. The Germans started to build their own steam engines. The Austrian everyone built their own engines, just not to have them imported from England or the United Kingdom. And this is basically the model of this. So the idea was not so much as what we have today in globalism, that you build this wherever you can build it the cheapest. That would have been probably anywhere but in Europe back then already with the first steam engines. They probably wouldn't even build them in England. They would have built them somewhere else where the labor was cheaper than anywhere in Europe. And the same was then true for the United States. So the Americans started building their own steam engines. And so you had 500 different 1,000 different steam engine manufacturers by 1840, and the same with railroad locomotives, with the steam engines for industrial production, steam engines to produce gas out of coal, and on it went. There was the big time of invention had started, and electricity was starting to get introduced, so and everyone was fumbling around in their own territory. This is how we really developed the Industrial Revolution, developed this, and now capitalism came into the picture because it required capital to build these factories. So each country was on the race to develop their financial markets. Every country had one for capitalism. And these capitalists were interested on a national level to do this. You had some foreign investors, but that was not really there. Everyone was patriotic, and everyone had a national interest to succeed, more so than the other country. And then came the realization of the capitalists that at one point or another, I would say probably by 1910, 1920, around when Henry Ford introduced his T model, and he had come up with the assembly line and everything else, he said to pay his workers a good wage so that he can buy his vehicles. That made a lot of sense. However, the economists at that time started to take this model apart, and they said it makes more sense to go to the country where you have the best environment to do something like this. So you would go to the country where coal is the easiest to be, mined, where you don't have to, where it's not very costly, whether it's labor or equipment. And was the race to the bottom, what we call this. And that transpired around in the 1920s. It also led to the first crash we had there in 1930. There were other things, but this was already developing at that time. It was also the time with World War I where things started to change, and then of course that led then into World War II, where Völkisch National had become again an important issue, but now it was more race-based to exclude people out of a country, rather than an economic model or a unification to succeed in a self-sustained level. And so that kind of got twisted. This is why the Nazism, you can't really, it doesn't really fit into the traditional Völkisch Nationale model of what we had or what it used to be. And then came the end of World War II and the separation between East and West, and the economic and differences. And the war, so to speak, the Cold War started between the idea of capitalism and the idea of socialism, communism started. Communism in itself is basically capitalism, state capitalism, where the state owns the production. And in this, they of course had free reign, and it was the Soviet Union who explored that economic model is to minimize production sites and consolidate everything. It actually came from them. The idea itself took hold in America here among American capitalists who looked at this and they said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it does make a lot of sense. It is not very beneficial for the country. It makes a lot of sense for the corporation, for the board of directors, for the management, and especially for the shareholders who are receiving dividends, the payout of this. And so they can care less. So as bigger the dividend is, as more attractive a stock becomes normally. Today we are looking at the corporate bonds, the issue, rather than the dividends, because most stock don't pay dividends anymore. So you have to go into the bonds to get a annual payment coming in on your capital you're deploying into the credit market in this case. And so this is how this all changed. Now, the supporters who emerged in the 50s, 60s, 70s out of this was primarily the end result was Margaret Thatcher in England and Ronald Reagan with George Bush Sr. and then George Bush Jr., what we call the Neoconservatives. And they favored this model based on the decentralization or centralization of actual labor or production into the area wherever it is the cheapest and most cost effective, because also what had come of age at this point was transportation. So you could transport many, many items on these ever getting bigger and bigger ships, cargo ships they were building, and with the introduction of the container, of the norm standard size container with 40 foot primarily and 20 foot, and the truck capabilities, railroad capabilities to move this quickly all around the world. By that point, everything went. And the final blow in this to destroy Völkisch National was what was Nixon's. Nixon's move when he took America off the gold standard, because now America could borrow as a country more and more money and get that into the financial markets, especially Wall Street, which then in turn would create the US dollar as the world reserve currency and basically taking off the English pound sterling off this job it had until like that time, 1950s, 60s into the 70s. That was really the full transition of it. And as a result of this, the United States is now $40 trillion in debt. And it really doesn't make any difference because they can print the money. It would be then, it is basically monopoly money. You can't say it in any other way because there is nothing here you can take out of the country as a foreign investor, which is of any value, which you can take with you. Because if you take the land as collateral, you can't take the land with you. You can take certain items if you could get them, but then the military is going to kind of cut you out of it. So they're going to keep the thing going ad infinitum. There's no end in sight to this. But this is basically now where we are. Now we have a reoccurrence of the idea of having Völkisch National as a political agenda. This is Trump running around the country trying to convince American manufacturers to bring manufacturing back to the United States. It is MAGA. MAGA is Völkisch National. We want to see that the money we have here, our tax money, is spent in the United States. We don't want that money to go anywhere else, whether it's in military operations, military aid, weapons, any type of form, help, or whatever, medication, whatever it is. No. So now we have the traditional idea of having a people-driven, citizen-driven desire to create a, again, national economy where very little money leaves the country. That's the idea, which is in full collision with capitalism as we have it today from the neoconservatism. And these two things don't work. Völkisch National is on the opposite end of capitalism because you're controlling through laws, through taxes, through tariffs, through customs, through duties, the import and the export of the nation. And the idea of Völkisch National again is that you have a self-sustained economy. That means whether it is oil, energy, food, clothing, whatever, is all produced within the country. It employs all the people in the country, from very smart to very stupid and everything in between, and everyone gets a good paycheck in the country, and the money circulates in the country, and you import very little. The way you import very little is by heavy tariffs on items when they come in. So steel is produced here, you mine the ore here, you use the coal, the whole schmuggle. And if you look at Europe, you will see that the European politics have basically disassembled this. So there's not one nation in Europe right now who could produce anything by themselves. When I left Germany in 1990, Germany was still capable, for the better part, except for crude oil, to basically have everything there what they needed for their production. It was already at that point that they were importing Russian gas through that gas pipeline ending there in Bavaria. But that was only a fraction, but it was the beginning of this whole thing, what they had undertaken in the 1970s and 1980s to get out of the Völkisch Nationale Volkswirtschaft. This was something, but it was difficult because you still had people, who were born from like 1890 until 1945, which grew up in this entire idea of Völkisch National and Volkswirtschaft. And this kind of was all basically disassembled in Europe. And we will see how this is going to go back. The AfD is a party which would support this, to a certain extent. You have otherwise no other party, because the CDU with Freddy, the SPD, the FDP, the socialists, the liberals, the libertarians, all of those are neocons. And this is basically the same thing here in the United States. The bigger part of the neocons are today in the central section of the Democratic Party, and the centrists in the Republican Party are still neocons. So they're the first ones who are going to run to India, to China, to Brazil, to wherever, India, wherever they can go, the lowest wages, the lowest whatever, to maintain this and centralize the production in these areas. And this is where we are in a full collision between what people want. I say one very important word in this is re-immigration, re-immigrating. So it's basically sending people back. That is part of the MAGA movement. You have it in Europe. They want to do this. Freddie said this. They're trying to satisfy this, but it is not quite working. The reason why they can do it is because the capitalists are not going to say too much to it unless it's going to have too much of an impact when they're deporting too many people. And they lose the laborers they actually need for each national economy. These people play a role in this. And once you're starting to get this off balance, then you're going to have the capitalists go apeshit in this literally, and they're going to cut all their funding to the politicians. So the politicians are going to go apeshit in it, and they're going to stop the deportations at one point or another when it gets too critical, when it gets too big, when there is too much effect on the national economy and the shareholders are starting to suffering losses as a result out of this. That's when this is going to come to an end. And then you're going to see that the people like the MAGA movement, or those people in Germany or in France or in Europe, wherever it is, who are trying to force deportations. They don't want to call it deportations. They re-immigrate someone. So instead of immigrating, you're re-immigrating. The great migration is the re-migration, basically in the opposite direction. And they will be very unhappy. And this is going to be this is a programmed collision coming here in the United States and over in Europe between capitalism and Völkisch National and national economy supporters. And that group is growing, and the other one is still in control with their money. So this is what the collision is going to be like it. And this will play out anywhere between now and the next 5 years to more or lesser extents. And we will see on how this is going to go. And this is part of this, like if you're looking at the Ukraine and Russia, is a similar situation of what we're looking at, if you listen to the Russians, of what Hawaii had when King Kamehameha was trying or was unifying at the expense of Oahu's ethnic group, or Hawaiians, to become one kingdom, which he actually did. And this is similar what you're seeing. What we not have had yet is the Russians driving up the Ukrainians up the Nuuanu Valley and throwing them off the cliff over on the other side into Kailua. That hasn't happened yet. If it gets to this point, I don't think it will. For one, there's no Nuuanu Valley anywhere in the Ukraine or in Russia, for that matter, where they're fighting, or the territory they're fighting for. Neither is the situation, but the same. They're not exactly the same ethnic groups, but they have some similar backgrounds. So that would be the only similarity you have with King Kamehameha and the Hawaiian Islands in the conflict or the war between the Ukraine and Russia. And this is why this is a Völkisch National undertaking from the Russian Federation. It's not Nazism. It's not Nazism on the side of the Ukraine, and it's not Nazism on the side of the Russians. It's Völkisch National. It's a very, very different story. I hope you found that video interesting. If you like, you can kind of comment. Please kind of be nice about it, even if you differ in opinion. I would be interesting to hear what you have to say. And other than that, I think I'm going to sign off for tonight, and I wish you a good evening.